The Hells Angels biker followed the little girl into the rusted train yard, and his wrath settled an old score in minutes. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain was falling hard that evening, the kind of downpour that made the world feel like it was being washed clean, but also threatened to drown anyone left exposed. The old train yard was silent, except for the sound of the raindrops hitting rusted metal and broken windows. In the midst of this quiet chaos, a young girl, no older than 10, was running through the yard, her small feet barely making a sound on the wet ground. Her name was Lily, and she was lost, afraid, and alone. She had been trying to escape from something that had chased her into the shadowy depths of this forgotten place. But when she heard the roaring sound of an engine in the distance, her heart skipped a beat. She looked up just in time to see the headlights of a motorcycle cutting through the darkness, and for a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The man on the bike was large, imposing, and covered in tattoos that made him look like someone straight out of a nightmare. His leather jacket bore the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels, a patch that marked him as both a brotherhood and a symbol of fear. He was exactly the kind of person Lily had been trying to avoid. But when the biker stopped in front of her, his eyes didn't have the coldness she expected. They were hard, yes, but there was something else there too. Concern? Compassion? Lily couldn't tell, but what she did know was that she was scared. Are you okay? The biker's voice was rough, the kind of voice that came from years of living on the edge, but it was gentle enough that Lily almost believed he cared. She didn't answer right away. Her body was trembling, and she wasn't sure if she should trust him. She had learned a long time ago that people, even the ones who looked kind, could hurt you when you least expected it. The biker, noticing her hesitation, lowered his helmet and spoke again, this time softer. I'm not here to hurt you, kid, but you're not safe here. Come with me. Lily took a step back, eyes darting around the train yard. Her thoughts were racing. Was this man really a savior, or was he just another threat in disguise? But the truth was, she had no other choice. She had been running for hours, and the fear of being found was greater than the fear of the unknown biker in front of her. Reluctantly, she nodded, and the biker helped her onto the back of his bike. As they sped away from the train yard, Lily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief wash over her. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew it was better than being alone in that cold, dark yard. What she didn't know was that this encounter would change everything. The biker, whose name was Jack, had his own reasons for being in that train yard that night. He was hunting someone from his past, someone who had wronged him in ways that still stung after years of silence. But as he looked at the girl clutching tightly to his back, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting her, making sure she was safe from whatever nightmare had been chasing her. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time that evening, Jack felt like he was on the right path. But that path was about to lead him to an old score that he thought was long buried. The storm had only just begun. As Jack roared through the dark, rain-soaked streets with Lily clinging to his back, the world seemed to blur around them. The wind whipped through their hair, and the rumble of his motorcycle cut through the night, offering a sense of comfort, but also a stark reminder of the storm they had just left behind. Lily sat stiffly, her small body trembling not just from the cold, but from the weight of the fear that still gripped her. Jack could feel the tension in her, a heaviness that he knew all too well. He had seen that same fear in his own reflection countless times. But now, as they sped away from the forgotten train yard, Jack could feel something else, a sense of responsibility that seemed to have found its place within him without warning. He glanced in the rearview mirror, eyes narrowing as the dark, looming shadows of the trees on the side of the road seemed to follow them. He knew that they weren't entirely safe yet. They were running, yes, but Jack could sense that something more dangerous was waiting just around the corner. The fear wasn't just from the weather or the long, lonely road ahead. No, it was the kind of fear that lingered when you knew someone, or something, was hunting you. When they reached the small rundown motel on the edge of town, Jack pulled the bike up under the awning and cut the engine. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the cold still bit through their jackets. Lily climbed off the back of the bike, her legs shaky from the long ride, and Jack helped her steady herself. He kept his hand on her shoulder as they walked inside. The neon sign flickered above them, casting an eerie glow over the otherwise quiet street. Jack had been here before, a long time ago, when things had been different. The bell above the motel door rang softly as they entered, and the elderly woman behind the counter gave them a nod of acknowledgement, though she didn't ask any questions. She had learned long ago that strangers with a story to tell were better left alone. Jack rented a room for the night, keeping his eyes on Lily as she wandered over to the small bed in the corner. She didn't say much, just staring out the window as the rain continued to fall. Jack's mind raced. What was it that had chased her here? Why had she been out there, alone, in that forsaken train yard? And why had he felt compelled to protect her? As he sank into the chair by the door, he let out a long sigh, running a hand through his rain-drenched hair. He had always been a loner, used to taking care of himself. But something about Lily, something about the way she had looked at him with those wide, trusting eyes, made him feel like he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. He glanced over at her again, watching as she pulled her knees to her chest, her eyes fixed on the window. Jack didn't know much about kids. He had never had the chance to build that kind of life. His years with the Hells Angels had been full of chaos, violence, and the constant need to prove himself. But in that moment, as he watched Lily, he realized that maybe this was his chance to do something different. He had always been a protector in his own way, but he had never had anyone to protect like this. He stood up, walking over to the bed. "Hey, Lily," he said softly, his voice gruff from years of shouting orders in the club, but gentle now. She looked up at him, her eyes still full of uncertainty. "You want to tell me what happened back there? Why were you in that train yard?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. I was running away," she said. "From who?" Jack asked, kneeling down beside her. Lily looked down at her hands, as if searching for the words. "My mom's boyfriend," she said, her voice trembling. He hurt me. And when I tried to tell my mom, she didn't believe me. So I ran." Jack's heart clenched as he listened. The story was all too familiar to him. Violence, betrayal, and the feeling of being abandoned by those who should protect you. He had been there once. Hell, he had lived through it. "You did the right thing," Jack said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You got away, and you're safe now." Lily looked up at him, her eyes still filled with fear, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of hope, perhaps. Jack could see it, and it made something inside him stir, something he hadn't felt in years. He had always kept his emotions buried, locked away behind the Hells Angels patch, but now, with this little girl in front of him, he couldn't ignore the pull to protect her. He stood up, pulling off his jacket and hanging it on the back of the door. "Get some rest," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll figure things out tomorrow." Lily nodded, still unsure, but grateful for the comfort that Jack offered. As she settled into the bed, Jack took a seat by the door, keeping watch. The storm raged on outside, but inside the motel room, there was a quiet that Jack hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of peace that came with knowing you had done the right thing, even if you weren't sure what would happen next. Little did Jack know, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to come for them. The storm outside had not let up, but inside the motel room, there was an eerie silence. Jack sat near the door, eyes scanning the dimly lit room, his mind far from at ease. He couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lily lay asleep on the bed, her small form curled up under the thick blankets Jack had given her. She looked peaceful for the first time in days, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. He had seen enough violence to understand that when something seemed too calm, it was usually the eye of the storm. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the quiet sound of the rain against the window. His muscles were tense, and his mind kept racing through everything that had led them here. Why had Lily been in that train yard alone? Why had she run? And what was the real story behind the man she had fled from? Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. He didn't know why this little girl had gotten under his skin so quickly. Maybe it was the way she reminded him of someone he had lost. Maybe it was the way she had trusted him without question. But there was something about her that made Jack feel like he had to protect her. It was the first time in a long while that he had felt this way about anyone. His whole life had been about fighting, surviving, keeping to himself. But here he was, doing the exact opposite. He had no idea what was coming next, but he couldn't just leave her behind. The knock on the door shattered his thoughts. It was quick, urgent. Jack's heart raced. He stood up immediately, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun tucked in his waistband. The sound of the knock repeated, more forceful this time. He glanced over at Lily, still asleep. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Whoever was at the door wasn't here for a friendly chat. He moved silently across the room, his boots making no sound on the worn carpet. His hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment, he thought about just slipping out the back, taking Lily and disappearing. But that wasn't an option anymore. He couldn't run. Not now. He yanked the door open. Standing in the doorway were two men, both wearing leather jackets with the unmistakable Hell's Angels insignia. They didn't speak at first, just stood there, eyes scanning the room. Jack felt his chest tighten. He recognized them, but not as friends. "We need to talk," one of them said, his voice low and gruff. Jack didn't answer right away. He glanced at Lily, still asleep on the bed. The last thing he wanted was for her to get caught up in whatever mess the Hell's Angels had stirred up this time. "What do you want?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. The two men exchanged a glance before the other one spoke. "We've got a problem, Jack. A big one. And it involves her," he said, nodding towards the bed. Jack's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The kid's got something they want," the man said. "Her mom's boyfriend has ties to people who don't take kindly to people running away." Jack's pulse quickened. "You're telling me she's being hunted?" The man nodded. "It's more than that. They'll come for her, Jack. And when they do, they'll burn everything to the ground." Jack felt a rush of anger surge through him. The last thing he wanted was to drag Lily into his world. But now, it seemed like that was exactly what was happening. He looked at the men standing in front of him. "What do you want from me?" "We want to make sure she's safe," the first man said. "We know how you handle things, Jack, but we need to move fast." Jack's mind raced. He wasn't ready for this. But then again, he hadn't been ready for anything in years. He glanced at the bed again, where Lily slept, unaware of the storm brewing outside. "We'll do it my way," Jack said, his voice cold. "Get in and get out. No one knows she's here, and no one needs to." "Understood." The men nodded. "Good," Jack said. He walked over to the small window and pulled back the curtain. He could see the faint glow of headlights in the distance, and a chill ran down his spine. Whoever they were running from, they were getting closer. Jack turned back to the men. "You're going to help me protect her," he said, his voice low but firm. "If anyone comes looking, they'll regret it." The men didn't hesitate. They understood what Jack was capable of. The next few hours passed in a blur. They moved quickly, setting up an early warning system outside the motel room and making sure the doors and windows were locked. Jack kept a close eye on Lily, though she remained oblivious to the danger that was closing in. As the night wore on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was all about to explode. But he couldn't let himself focus on that now. He had to protect her. He had no choice. He had been given a chance to make things right. And for the first time in years, Jack realized that he was willing to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of the rain tapping against the windows. Jack sat in the corner, his eyes fixed on the door, his mind racing with what had just happened. The two men from the Hell's Angels had left, disappearing into the night without a word. But Jack knew that things had just escalated beyond his control. The danger was closer now. He could feel it. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to be unaware of the tension in the air. She sat on the bed, drawing pictures in her notebook, her small hands moving quickly as if trying to escape the thoughts that had been weighing on her. Jack watched her for a moment before walking over to her, kneeling beside the bed. "Hey, Lily," he said softly, his voice steady. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with both trust and uncertainty. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She nodded, though Jack could tell that her mind was elsewhere. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just tired." Jack gave her a small smile, trying to reassure her, but the truth was, he was just as exhausted. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself, and it wasn't the life he had ever wanted. He had spent years running, hiding, keeping his distance from everyone. But now, with Lily in his care, everything had changed. He had to protect her. That's all that mattered now. The next few hours passed in a blur of tense silence. Jack couldn't relax. Not with the storm still raging outside and the knowledge that danger was lurking just beyond the motel room. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that drove by outside, had him on edge. But nothing prepared him for the knock on the door. It was quick, forceful, the kind of knock that demanded attention. Jack's heart skipped a beat. His hand instinctively went to the gun at his side, but he knew he couldn't rely on that. Not this time. He looked at Lily, who was still sitting on the bed, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," Jack said, his voice low but firm. He walked to the door, his steps silent, his every muscle tense. He knew that whoever was on the other side was not here to chat. Slowly, he opened the door, his eyes scanning the dark hallway. The last thing he wanted was to be caught off guard. Standing there were three men, their faces hidden under dark hoods, their bodies tense, as if ready to strike. They were big, imposing, and the kind of people Jack didn't want to mess with. But it was too late to back down now. "We're looking for someone," the man at the front said, his voice low and threatening. Jack didn't flinch. He had heard worse in his life. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack replied, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "You don't want to mess with me." The man smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made Jack's blood run cold. "We know exactly who you are, Jack," he said, his voice laced with venom. "And we know who she is too." Jack's heart skipped a beat as he realized what they were talking about. They were after Lily. The fear that had been building inside him for days finally broke free, and in that moment, everything clicked. These men were not here for him. They were here for the little girl he had promised to protect. Jack stepped forward, blocking their path. "You're not getting to her," he said, his voice low and deadly. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The men didn't move at first. They stood there, sizing him up, as if deciding whether to take him on or walk away. Jack could see the hesitation in their eyes, the realization that he wasn't just some random biker who could be pushed around. He had fought battles before, and he wasn't afraid to fight this one. Finally, the man at the front stepped forward, a smirk on his face. "You think you can stop us?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Jack didn't answer. He just took a step closer, his fists clenched, ready to fight for Lily, ready to fight for the first time in years. The man raised his hand, signaling to his companions. But before they could react, a loud crash rang out from the hallway. The door slammed open, and before Jack knew what was happening, one of the men was lying on the ground, his face bloodied and broken. It was Lily. She had grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and used it to defend herself. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief as the little girl stood there, holding the shard of glass in her small hand, her face determined. "I'm not going to let you hurt me," she said, her voice strong. Jack felt a rush of pride and relief. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about Lily finding her own strength, about her realizing that she didn't have to be afraid. The men who had come for her backed away slowly, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected this. But Jack knew that it wasn't over yet. There were still more battles to fight, and he wasn't going to let anyone harm Lily. Not now. Not ever. He looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Lily smiled up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and defiance. She was no longer the scared little girl who had run away from danger. She was a fighter now, and as Jack watched the men retreat into the night, he knew that he would do whatever it took to protect her. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. The silence in the motel room felt almost unbearable. Jack stood at the window, watching the rain still pour down outside, the storm showing no signs of letting up. He couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. The men who had come for Lily earlier weren't the only threat, and Jack knew it. He had been in this world long enough to recognize that when one problem was solved, another would soon take its place. His eyes shifted to the bed where Lily was now sleeping peacefully. The calm on her face, though comforting, felt temporary. Jack knew that it wouldn't last. He had made a promise to keep her safe, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. But what if the danger was bigger than he could handle? What if the people after her weren't just a few bikers or thugs? What if they were tied to something much larger, something that Jack couldn't fight alone? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a low rumble from outside. The unmistakable sound of motorcycles revving up. Jack's heart sank. His instinct kicked in, and he was already moving before he realized it. He grabbed his jacket and slid his gun into the holster, his mind racing. He didn't have time to waste. He needed to protect Lily, and he needed to do it now. As he opened the door, he saw the headlights of several bikes coming down the street, the figures on them casting long shadows in the rain. Jack's hand tightened around the handle of his gun as he stepped out into the cold night air. The group of bikers stopped just outside the motel, their engines growling like a pack of wild animals. Jack knew they weren't here for a friendly visit. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted his bike and approached Jack with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "You've got something that belongs to us," the man said, his voice rough and menacing. Jack stood his ground, eyes narrowing. "I don't have anything of yours," he replied, his voice steady but laced with warning. The man smirked. "Oh, you do? And you're not going to get away with keeping her?" Jack's heart raced. He knew exactly who they were talking about. "Lily." The man stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You think you can just take her and run? You're dead wrong, biker. She's ours." Jack's pulse quickened. He wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. "I'm not handing her over to you," Jack said firmly, his hand tightening on the grip of his gun. The man's eyes flickered for a moment, as if weighing his options. Then he nodded to his crew. In an instant, the other bikers dismounted and began moving toward the motel. Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled his gun from its holster and pointed it at the leader. "Back off," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. The leader raised his hands in mock surrender, a grin spreading across his face. "You really think you can stop all of us?" he taunted. But before Jack could respond, the sound of a door opening behind him caught his attention. Lily appeared in the doorway, her small figure silhouetted against the dim light of the motel room. "Jack?" she called, her voice soft but filled with worry. Jack's heart sank as he turned to face her. "Stay inside, Lily," he said quickly, his voice sharp with urgency. But Lily didn't move. Instead, she stepped out into the rain, her eyes wide with fear but filled with a determination Jack hadn't seen before. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady, almost defiant. "I can't. I won't." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He had promised to protect her, but in that moment, he realized just how much she had already taken control of her own fate. She wasn't the scared little girl who had run from danger anymore. She was strong, and Jack could see that. But now, they were both in danger. The bikers had noticed her, and their eyes gleamed with malicious intent. "She's a tough one, isn't she?" the leader sneered, taking a step toward her. "But that won't save her." Jack stepped in front of Lily, his body blocking her from the group. "Get back on your bikes and leave," Jack said, his voice low but filled with menace. The leader took another step forward, his face contorted in a cruel smirk. "I don't think so," he said. "You're going to regret this." In the split second before the leader could act, Jack fired a warning shot into the air. The loud bang echoed through the empty parking lot, sending a shockwave of tension through the group. The bikers froze. "I'm not going to tell you again," Jack growled. The leader's grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're a dead man, Jack," he spat. "We'll be back. And next time, we won't be so merciful." With that, the group of bikers climbed back onto their bikes, revving their engines in unison. Jack didn't lower his gun until they were out of sight. He turned to Lily, his chest heaving with adrenaline. She was standing there, staring at him with a look of determination on her face. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice softer now. Lily nodded. "I'm fine. But what happens now?" Jack's heart tightened as he realized the weight of her question. What had happened now? They couldn't keep running forever. Jack looked at the motel room behind them, then at the dark road stretching out before them. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He would protect Lily, no matter what. And if that meant facing whatever was coming for them, then he would fight. He took a deep breath and looked at Lily. "We keep moving. We don't stop. Not until we're safe." Lily nodded, her expression fierce and unwavering. She was ready for whatever came next. And so was Jack. The morning after the bikers had left, the motel room felt suffocatingly quiet. Jack sat by the window, staring out at the gray skies, his mind spinning with thoughts of what had happened the night before. The bikers, their threat still hanging in the air, had retreated for now, but Jack knew that this was far from over. They wouldn't give up so easily. The world outside seemed oblivious to the danger that still loomed, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their calm would be shattered any minute. Lily was still asleep, the sound of her gentle breathing a small comfort in the otherwise tense atmosphere. She had shown bravery, strength that Jack hadn't expected from someone so young. But he couldn't help but wonder if she fully understood what they were up against. Jack's thoughts were interrupted when Lily stirred in bed. She rubbed her eyes, looking up at him with a mix of confusion and weariness. "Is it morning?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse from sleep. Jack nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it's morning," he said, though his voice didn't carry the reassurance he meant it to. Lily sat up slowly, her small hands pushing against the covers. She seemed calmer than she had the night before, but Jack knew it was only a temporary peace. She still had that look in her eyes, the one of someone who had seen too much too soon. "Are we going to be okay?" Lily asked quietly, as if she had been holding the question in all night. Jack hesitated before answering, his gaze falling to the floor. "I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "But we can't stay here much longer. It's not safe." Lily looked at him, her brow furrowed in concern. "Where are we going?" Jack took a deep breath, standing up and walking over to the small table near the window. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice steadying. "I don't know where yet, but we'll figure it out." As Jack packed their things, his mind raced with possibilities. He couldn't keep running forever, but what choice did he have? The people after Lily weren't just some random thugs. They were dangerous, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until they had her. He wasn't sure if he could protect her forever, but he'd be damned if he didn't try. Lily watched him, sensing the tension in the air. She didn't ask any more questions, but the worry in her eyes spoke volumes. Jack finished gathering their belongings and turned to face her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, though there was still hesitation in her movement. Jack knew she was scared. Hell, he was scared too. But there was no time to waste. They had to keep moving. As they stepped out into the damp morning air, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every car that passed, every shadow, seemed to hold a potential threat. They made their way to the parking lot, Jack keeping a protective arm around Lily as they walked. He kept glancing over his shoulder, making sure no one was following them. His instincts told him they weren't safe yet. Jack helped Lily into the passenger seat of the motorcycle, securing her helmet before pulling his own on. He revved the engine, the familiar roar of the bike, offering him a small sense of control in a world that felt like it was spiraling out of his grasp. As they sped down the highway, Jack's mind remained on high alert. The road stretched out before them, seemingly endless, but Jack knew it wasn't the road they had to worry about. It was the people who would be waiting for them at the end of it. He tried to focus on the present, on getting them as far away from the motel as possible. But every time he looked at Lily, he was reminded of the promise he had made to her, to keep her safe, no matter what. And right now, that felt like an impossible task. The wind howled around them as they rode, the rain starting to pick up again. Jack tightened his grip on the handlebars, pushing the bike faster. He could feel Lily clutching at his back, her small hands trembling against him. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew they couldn't stay on this road forever. He had to find a place to hide, somewhere they could regroup and figure out what to do next. As the miles passed, Jack began to notice something. The road seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. There were fewer cars, fewer signs of life. It was as if the world around them was holding its breath. Jack's instincts flared. Something was wrong. He glanced over his shoulder once more, but there was nothing behind them. No cars, no signs of trouble. But that didn't ease the knot tightening in his stomach. He pushed the bike harder, urging it forward. They needed to get out of sight, fast. Jack's eyes scanned the road ahead, searching for a place to pull off, a safe spot to hide. That's when he saw it. A small, weathered diner, tucked away at the edge of a small town. It wasn't much, but it was a place to stop, a place to regroup. Jack turned the bike toward it, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he slowed down. He parked behind the diner, out of sight from the road, and cut the engine. Lily climbed off the bike, still shaken but trying to hide it. "What is it?" she asked, looking up at him. "We need to lay low for a while," Jack said. "We can't afford to keep moving like this. We need to figure out our next move." They walked toward the diner, Jack keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The old building stood like a relic of a time long past, the neon sign flickering weakly in the rain. As they entered, the warm air hit them, a stark contrast to the cold, damp world outside. The diner was nearly empty, with only a few patrons scattered across the tables. The waitress behind the counter gave them a wary look, but said nothing. Jack knew this wasn't the safest place, but it was as close as they could get for now. They slid into a booth in the back, and Jack ordered coffee, trying to act casual despite the tension in his chest. The waitress brought their drinks over and left them alone. Jack stared into his cup, his thoughts racing. They couldn't stay here long. The bikers would be looking for them, and Jack had no idea how far their reach extended. He had to make a plan. He had to keep Lily safe, and the only way to do that was to stay one step ahead. The diner was quiet, the faint hum of the old fridge in the corner the only sound, aside from the steady drizzle of rain outside. Jack sat in the booth, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his coffee cup. Lily sat across from him, her head bent as she fiddled with the corner of the napkin. Jack kept stealing glances at her, watching her closely. She was brave, that much he could tell. But she was still a child, and he knew the dangers that surrounded them weren't something a kid should face alone. The silence was almost unbearable. The more Jack thought about their situation, the more trapped he felt. They couldn't keep running forever. He had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Lily, and that made all the difference. He had spent years with his guard up, hiding his emotions and focusing only on survival. But now, with her in his life, everything had shifted. She was his responsibility, and he would die before letting anything happen to her. The coffee in front of him had long gone cold, but Jack didn't care. His mind was racing, running through every possibility, every option. They couldn't stay in this small town forever. They needed to move. They needed to disappear. But how? The sound of a door opening caught his attention, and Jack immediately stiffened. He turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the room, but he didn't want to look too obvious. A man had entered the diner, tall with broad shoulders, his face hidden under the brim of his baseball cap. He glanced around the room briefly before making his way to the counter, his boots clicking on the worn linoleum floor. Jack watched him carefully, his hand instinctively resting on the edge of his jacket where his gun was concealed. The man ordered a cup of coffee and sat down at the counter, not paying them any attention. Jack didn't let his guard down. There was something about this guy, something that set his instincts on edge. He glanced at Lily, who had shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She must have sensed the tension too. Jack gave her a reassuring look, but inside, his nerves were fraying. They needed to leave, and fast. Jack stood up abruptly, the movement startling Lily. "Stay here," he said, his voice low. "I'll be right back." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. She didn't speak, but Jack could see the worry on her face. He didn't want to leave her alone, but he had no choice. He needed to make sure they weren't being followed. He walked toward the restroom, his steps quick and purposeful. As soon as he rounded the corner, he pressed his back against the wall, straining to listen. The low murmur of voices from the counter faded into the background as Jack focused on the sound of his own heartbeat. He counted to 10, trying to steady his breath. The door to the restroom opened, and Jack tensed, ready to confront whatever threat was waiting for him. But it was just the man from the counter, coming out to use the bathroom. Jack watched him as he passed, making sure to keep his distance. The man didn't seem to notice Jack at all, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the man stepped into the restroom, Jack moved quickly back to the booth where Lily was sitting. He slid in beside her, keeping his face calm. "We need to go," he said quietly. Lily didn't ask questions. She stood up, slipping her hand into his, her small fingers gripping his tightly. Jack glanced around the diner once more, his gaze lingering on the man at the counter. He was still sitting there, but something about the way he was watching them sent a chill down Jack's spine. It was like the man was waiting for them to make their move. Jack didn't want to wait to find out if he was right. They couldn't afford to be spotted. Jack pulled a few bills from his pocket, tossing them on the table to cover their food, and he quickly stood up. Lily followed, her eyes darting around nervously. "Let's go," Jack said, keeping his voice calm, though his mind was racing. They walked quickly toward the door, Jack keeping his body between Lily and the man at the counter. As they stepped outside, the cold wind hit them, but Jack barely noticed. His mind was on high alert. They needed to get out of sight, fast. The moment they stepped into the parking lot, Jack glanced around. No sign of anyone following them, but he didn't trust it. He walked briskly toward the bike, keeping a watchful eye on every corner of the lot. Lily climbed onto the bike, her hands gripping his jacket as he revved the engine. He could feel the weight of the rain as it started to come down harder. The world seemed to close in around them, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. He kicked the bike into gear, the roar of the engine cutting through the silence. They were moving again, but Jack couldn't relax. Not yet. Not until they were miles away from the diner and out of harm's reach. They rode in silence, the rain falling in sheets, the streets empty and desolate. Jack's thoughts kept circling back to the man in the diner. Who was he? And why had he been watching them so closely? They couldn't afford to trust anyone. Jack pushed the bike faster, trying to outrun the anxiety gnawing at his gut. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stop until they were safe. No matter what. They rode for hours, Jack's grip on the handlebars tightening with every mile, every turn. Lily had fallen asleep against his back, her body exhausted from the days of running. Jack kept pushing forward, not knowing where they were headed, just that they had to keep moving. He would do whatever it took to protect her, and he wouldn't stop until they were free. The rain had stopped, but the tension in the air felt heavier than ever. Jack could feel it pressing on him as he rode the bike down the empty highway, the sound of the engine a constant hum beneath him. The world outside seemed to stretch endlessly, the roads flat and desolate, but his mind was far from peaceful. Lily had fallen asleep against his back, her body exhausted from the days of running. Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars, but no matter how fast he rode, he couldn't outrun the anxiety that gnawed at him. They were on the move again, but he knew they couldn't keep running forever. The further they went, the more Jack felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He wasn't just trying to protect Lily anymore. He was also running from the man he had been, the man he had become, and the ones who had made him this way. The more Jack thought about it, the more he realized he had to face his past head-on, or it would destroy him. They needed to find safety, but Jack had no idea where that might be. He pushed the bike harder, trying to outrun the fear creeping into his mind. The sound of the engine roared as they sped down the road, and Jack couldn't help but glance back, just to make sure no one was following them. There was nothing. The road was empty, the world stretching out before them in all its quiet emptiness. But that didn't make Jack feel any better. It just made him more aware of the danger that could be lurking just around the corner. A few hours later, the landscape began to change. The endless flat roads turned into winding hills, and the air felt cooler as the rain clouds began to break apart. Jack slowed down as they entered a small town, the streetlights flickering softly as he passed by. He hadn't planned on stopping, but his eyes darted toward a small motel on the side of the road. It wasn't much, old, run down, but it looked like the kind of place where no one would ask questions. Jack decided it was as good a place as any to rest for the night. He pulled the bike into the parking lot and killed the engine, the sound of the motor fading into the quiet night. Lily stirred on his back, still groggy from sleep. She rubbed her eyes and yawned, looking around. "Are we stopping here?" she asked softly, her voice full of uncertainty. Jack nodded, glancing around at the dark parking lot. "Just for the night. We need to lay low." He helped her off the bike, and they walked toward the motel lobby. The lights inside were dim, and the air smelled musty, but it was better than being out in the open. Jack approached the counter, where an older man sat reading a newspaper. He looked up slowly, his tired eyes scanning them. "Just one night," Jack said, his voice firm, but not threatening. The man nodded slowly, without saying much. He handed Jack a key, and Jack paid him without hesitation. They didn't talk much as they made their way to the room, the soft shuffle of their footsteps the only sound. Jack opened the door to the room, which was small but clean enough. The bed was unmade, the curtains drawn shut, but it was a safe place for the night. Lily walked in first and immediately climbed onto the bed, lying down with a sigh. Jack closed the door behind them and locked it. He leaned against the wall, his mind still racing. He had no plan. He had no idea what to do next. He was just trying to keep them alive. "Jack!" Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to look at her. She was sitting up on the bed now, her eyes wide, filled with worry. "Are we going to be okay?" Jack swallowed hard, the weight of her question pressing on him. He had to say something that would make her feel safe, but the truth was, he didn't know. He didn't know if they would ever be okay. He didn't know how much longer he could protect her. But he had to try. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady despite the doubt gnawing at him. I'm going to make sure of it. Lily nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. She lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. He knew she wasn't as sure as he was. She had seen too much. Jack sat down at the small table by the window, watching the rain start again. He didn't feel any safer here, but they couldn't keep moving. Not yet. He had to give them both a break. He glanced over at Lily again, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had made a promise to protect her, and he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. But as the hours passed, the reality of their situation began to settle in. They couldn't keep running forever. He needed to face the men who were after them, confront whatever was waiting in the shadows. It was only a matter of time before they came for Lily, and Jack couldn't outrun them any longer. The more he thought about it, the more he realized there was only one way out of this. They had to fight. He had to fight. He had to stop running, stop hiding, and take a stand. Jack stood up, his jaw clenched. He looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep, her small body curled up on the bed. For her, he would do anything. He would take down anyone who came for her, no matter the cost. It was time to end this, once and for all. The following morning, the sky was a dull gray, the rain relentless and cold. Jack had barely slept, his mind a constant whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and plans that never seemed to settle. He had told Lily they would be okay, but the words felt hollow in his own ears. He was no longer sure. The weight of what was coming pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket, and he knew that hiding out in motels and running from danger wasn't a long-term solution. He needed to confront the people who were after them. He needed to stop running. As the sun barely crept through the thick clouds, Jack stood in the small, musty room, pacing back and forth. His fingers ran over the rough surface of the table where he had left the small map. He'd been staring at it for hours, trying to figure out a route, a way out. But there was no safe way out, not yet. His mind kept flashing back. To the diner, to the man who had been watching them. Something didn't sit right with Jack. He had spent enough time in this world, enough time surrounded by dangerous people, to know when something was off. Whoever had sent those bikers was playing a long game. They had found them once, and they would find them again, unless Jack made a move first. Lily stirred on the bed, her small figure shifting beneath the thin covers. Jack looked over at her, his heart tightening. She was safe for now, but for how long? She was just a kid, caught up in a world that had never cared for her. Jack had to protect her. That's all that mattered now. He grabbed his jacket, pulling it on quickly. He needed to leave before the bikers came back. The longer they stayed here, the more danger they were in. As he walked to the door, he glanced at Lily one last time. She was still asleep, her face soft, free from the fear that had dominated her expression the past few days. Jack's chest tightened. He hated the idea of dragging her into this, but there was no other choice. He had made a promise. With one last look at her, Jack stepped outside, the rain falling in steady sheets. His boots splashed through puddles as he made his way to the bike, starting it up with a roar. The cold wind hit him as he sped off, the engine cutting through the silence like a warning. He wasn't sure where he was headed, only that he had to keep moving. The road stretched out before him, endless and desolate, but Jack kept his focus. He couldn't afford distractions. His thoughts were filled with the bikers, the man in the diner, the threats that loomed over them. It felt like they were being pulled into something much bigger than either of them had imagined. The miles passed by, and as the day wore on, Jack started to feel the weight of the decision he had made. He was putting everything on the line, his life, Lily's life. But what choice did he have? He couldn't just let them come for her again. He couldn't let the past keep chasing them. Jack pushed the bike harder, the engine screaming as he leaned into the curves of the road. He was heading toward the mountains. Now, a place he knew well, a place where he could lay low and figure out their next move. But something told him that the mountains wouldn't be enough. No matter where he went, the past had a way of catching up. As he turned a corner, a faint sound caught his ear. It was the hum of a motorcycle, distant but unmistakable. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately glanced over his shoulder. The roar of the engine grew louder. Jack's heart raced as he sped up, the tires of the bike skimming the wet pavement. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was following them. Panic hit him like a physical blow. He swerved, making a sharp turn off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that cut through the trees. The bike slid beneath him, but Jack kept it steady, the sound of the pursuing motorcycle growing fainter. He glanced back once more, just in time to see the figure behind him round the corner. It was too late to outrun them now. Jack slammed the brakes, the tires skidding to a halt as he turned sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. The other bike came into view, a black silhouette against the gray sky, headlights shining brightly. The rider was close now, only a few yards away. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. He wasn't sure who was behind him, another one of the bikers? Someone worse? All he knew was that he had to act fast. He turned the bike again, this time toward the cover of a thick copse of trees. He had to lose them, or at least buy some time. But as he sped into the forest, the sound of the other motorcycle followed, relentless. Jack cursed under his breath, his mind racing for a solution. There was nowhere to go, no way to outrun them in these woods. His only chance was to fight. He stopped the bike suddenly, jumping off and grabbing the rifle that had been tucked behind his seat. His hands were steady, his focus sharp. The rider came into view, his bike screeching to a halt just feet away. The man stepped off his motorcycle, his face obscured by a helmet, but his posture spoke volumes. Jack's grip tightened around the rifle. "What do you want?" Jack asked, his voice low but firm. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step toward Jack, a menacing grin visible beneath the helmet. Jack's breath quickened, the world around him narrowing to just the two of them. His instincts told him this wasn't going to end without a fight. He had no choice. He lifted the rifle, aiming it carefully at the man, his finger hovering over the trigger. But the man stopped, raising his hand slowly. "I don't want to fight you, Jack," the man said, his voice muffled but clear enough. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want?" The man stepped closer, lowering his hands. "I'm here to help," he said. "We don't have much time. They're coming for her." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he demanded. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he glanced toward the trees, where Jack could hear the faint sound of engines in the distance. The threat was real, and it was closing in fast. The sound of approaching motorcycles grew louder, the rumble vibrating through the air, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. His grip tightened around the rifle, and for a moment, he considered running again. But there was nowhere left to run. They had found him. The man in front of him, still standing with his hands raised in a gesture of calm, was not someone Jack trusted, but his words echoed in Jack's mind. "They're coming for her." Jack's heart thudded in his chest, every instinct telling him to be ready for whatever was about to happen. "Who's coming?" Jack demanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. The man hesitated, glancing toward the trees again, then back at Jack, his eyes hidden beneath his helmet. "People much worse than us," the man replied, his voice heavy with something Jack couldn't quite place. "The people who want her." Jack's stomach twisted. He could feel the weight of every word the man spoke. It wasn't just the bikers that were after Lily. It was something deeper, something much darker. "Why should I believe you?" Jack asked, taking a small step backward, keeping his rifle steady. The man's hands slowly lowered, and he stepped back, trying to show he meant no harm. "Because I'm the one who's been trying to stop them," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "I've been tracking them for months. I didn't want to get involved, but you don't have much time. They'll be here any minute now." Jack's mind raced. Who was this man? And why had he been following them? He didn't know whether to trust him, but he had no other choice. "What do you want from me?" Jack growled, his fingers still on the rifle's trigger. The man looked at him, the expression in his eyes unreadable. "I want to help you protect her," he said simply. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let his guard down. "You're not helping me by showing up with no warning." Jack shot back, still skeptical. "You're making everything worse." The man sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation was too much to bear. "I know this looks bad," he said, his voice low, "but you're not going to get out of this alone. I've seen the people coming for you. They don't stop. They won't stop until they have what they want." Jack's grip on the rifle loosened slightly, but he didn't lower it. "And what is it they want?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man paused before answering. "Lily, and whatever she's holding." Jack's mind whirled. What could Lily possibly have that was so important? He looked at her, sitting behind him, her small hands gripping the seat of the bike, her eyes wide with fear. She had no idea what they were talking about. Jack didn't want her to know. He needed to protect her, even from the truth. "What's going on here?" Jack's voice trembled with the weight of the question. "Why is she so important?" The man's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimpse of vulnerability. It's not just about her, the man said quietly. It's about the people who are after her. They've been hiding in the shadows for years, using people like her for their own gain. They've been waiting for someone to finally cross their path. Jack's mind was racing, but before he could ask another question, the sound of motorcycles grew louder. Jack looked over his shoulder, and in the distance, he could make out the silhouettes of bikes approaching. The man stepped forward, blocking Jack's view. "We don't have much time," he said, urgency clear in his voice. "Get on the bike. We need to move now." Jack's pulse quickened. The situation had just gone from bad to worse. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't hide. But for Lily, he would do anything. He turned to her, his voice steady but filled with determination. "Lily, get on the bike. Now." Lily didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the bike with a swift motion, her face pale, but her hands steady as she wrapped her arms around Jack's waist. Jack didn't waste another second. He kicked the bike into gear, and they sped off into the woods, the roar of the engines behind them growing louder with each passing second. Jack didn't know where he was going, but he knew they couldn't stay in the open. The man who had warned them followed closely behind, his bike roaring in sync with theirs, but Jack didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. The trees blurred past them, the sounds of the forest mixing with the frantic whine of the engines. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Not with Lily depending on him. The road ahead twisted and turned, and Jack took each curve at full speed, not caring for the risk. They had to keep moving. They had to stay ahead of the danger. As they reached the edge of the forest, the sounds of the motorcycles behind them grew louder. Jack's eyes darted between the trees, searching for a place to hide, a way to lose them. He pushed the bike harder, but the man behind them was still there, gaining on them with every second. The trees began to thin out, and Jack saw a small cabin up ahead, partially hidden by the foliage. It wasn't much, but it was their best chance. He turned sharply, heading toward the cabin, his tires skidding on the gravel path. The man followed closely behind, but Jack's focus was on getting them inside the cabin, where they could regroup. They didn't have much time. They had to make their stand here, or it would be over. As Jack pulled into the driveway of the cabin, he could see the other bikes closing in, but for the first time since this nightmare had started, he felt a small spark of hope. They had a chance. They just had to make it count. The cabin was old, the wood darkened with age, and the sound of the wind howling through the trees outside made the air inside feel colder than it actually was. Jack parked the bike just outside the front door, quickly dismounting and helping Lily off the back. She looked up at the cabin with wide eyes, clearly unsure of what they were walking into. But Jack didn't give her much time to wonder. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and filled with urgency. He looked back over his shoulder, the sound of motorcycles still echoing through the woods, growing louder by the second. Jack knew they couldn't stay here for long. "Get inside now," he instructed, his voice sharper this time. Lily hesitated for just a moment, but followed him quickly as they made their way to the door. Jack kicked it open with a force that made the hinges creak, and they rushed inside. The cabin was small, a single room with a fireplace in the corner and a dusty wooden table in the center. Jack immediately went to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds to get a look at the road behind them. The motorcycles were closing in fast, and Jack's heart began to race. He moved quickly, scanning the room for anything useful. The cabin had been abandoned for a long time. That much was clear. The furniture was worn, the floor covered in dust, but there was still a faint smell of wood smoke in the air. Jack's eyes landed on a rusty old shotgun leaning against the wall by the fireplace. He grabbed it without hesitation and checked the chamber. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Lily was standing in the center of the room, her wide eyes taking in everything. She was scared, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Jack could see it in her face. She was tired of running, tired of the fear that had followed them every step of the way. But Jack wasn't about to give up now. He had promised her he would protect her, and he wasn't about to let that promise slip away. He turned back toward Lily, his voice soft but firm. "Listen to me, Lily. I'm not leaving you. I'll protect you, no matter what." She nodded, her small face serious, her lips pressed tightly together. Jack could see the trust in her eyes, but he could also see the worry. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She had learned too much about the world in too little time. The sound of motorcycles reached Jack's ears again, closer this time. The man who had warned them earlier had said they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and Jack was about to find out just how true that was. He moved quickly to the door, peering through the cracks in the wood. He could see headlights in the distance, moving through the trees. They had found them. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake coming here. But then he heard Lily's voice from behind him. "We're going to be okay, right?" Jack turned around to face her, his expression hardening. "We are, kid. I won't let anything happen to you." He could see the fear in her eyes, but she nodded, trusting him, even though she was scared. He could see the same determination in her that he had felt when he was her age, a will to survive that ran deep. Jack moved quickly, securing the shotgun and positioning himself by the door, waiting. He knew what was coming, and he had to be ready. The headlights grew brighter, and Jack's breath quickened. They were almost here. His hand tightened on the shotgun, ready to defend Lily and himself. But then, just as he was about to act, the sound of the motorcycles cut off abruptly. For a brief moment, everything was still. Jack's heart was in his throat. He couldn't let his guard down. Slowly, he made his way to the window, peering out through the slats. The motorcycles were there, parked in a line just outside the cabin. The riders were dismounting, their heavy boots hitting the ground with a thud. Jack's instincts flared. He wasn't sure who they were, but he knew that they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take what they wanted. Jack's mind raced as he glanced at Lily. She was standing behind him, her eyes wide, her face pale. She didn't speak, but Jack could feel the tension radiating from her. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay quiet. Don't move unless I say so." She nodded, her small hand clutching his arm for comfort. Jack's eyes moved back to the window. He could see the figures now, moving toward the cabin. There were 3 of them, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. The man who had been leading the group before was at the front, his eyes scanning the cabin. Jack's grip tightened on the shotgun. He wasn't going to let them take Lily. Not now. Not ever. He waited, holding his breath as the footsteps grew closer. The door to the cabin creaked as someone outside tested it, and Jack's heart stopped. They were right there. Jack held his breath, ready for whatever came next. But then, just as the door was about to open, a loud crash echoed through the woods. The sound of another bike revving, coming from behind the cabin. Jack's mind went into overdrive. Someone was coming for them. But who? The riders outside froze for a moment, their heads turning in the direction of the noise. Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open with all his strength, rushing outside to confront whoever was coming. The fight for their survival was far from over, and Jack was ready to finish it once and for all. The loud crash that echoed through the trees startled both Jack and Lily. The footsteps outside the cabin paused for a moment, then continued, but this time with more caution, as if the unexpected noise had shifted the dynamic. Jack's heart was racing, every muscle in his body tensed, ready for whatever was coming next. He looked over at Lily, whose wide eyes reflected the same fear he was feeling. She clutched his arm tightly, her small body trembling. Jack squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Stay close," he whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. He stepped back, keeping his body between Lily and the door, eyes flicking back and forth, calculating their options. His mind raced as he scanned the room. The back door was the only escape route they had, but it led directly into the woods, and he couldn't afford to run without a plan. Just as he was about to make a decision, the front door slammed open, and 3 men, all wearing dark helmets and leather jackets, stormed into the cabin. Jack's instincts kicked in. Without a second thought, he lunged forward, grabbing the nearest man by the collar, throwing him to the ground with a force that shocked even him. The other 2 bikers hesitated for a split second, surprised by Jack's sudden attack, but they quickly recovered. One of them reached for a knife, while the other pulled out a crowbar. Jack backed away, putting himself between them and Lily, the shotgun now firmly in his grip. "Get away from her," Jack growled, his voice laced with anger. The 2 bikers exchanged looks, then smirked. "You think you can stop us, old man?" one of them sneered. Jack didn't waste any more time with words. With a swift movement, he raised the shotgun, aiming it directly at the man with the crowbar. The men froze, eyes widening as they realized they had underestimated him. "Get back," Jack ordered, his voice low and deadly. They didn't move. The tension in the room was unbearable. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of another motorcycle revving up broke the silence. Jack's eyes flicked toward the window, but the bikers didn't seem to notice. They were too focused on him. He had no time to think. His hand tightened around the shotgun, and he was ready to pull the trigger when suddenly, the door crashed open again, this time with more force than before. The men turned just in time to see a figure step into the doorway. It was the man who had been following them, the one who had warned Jack earlier. "You're making a big mistake," the man said, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable authority. The bikers looked at him, confused but not willing to back down. "Who the hell are you?" one of them spat. The man took a step forward, his gaze unflinching. "I'm the one who's been keeping you off their trail," he said, his voice steady. "And I've had enough." Without another word, the man raised his hand, and in the blink of an eye, a loud bang rang out, followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. One of the bikers crumpled to the ground, a bullet wound in his chest. The other two jumped back, their faces pale with shock. Jack's heart raced. The man had just killed one of them without hesitation, and now, the remaining bikers were terrified. Jack didn't lower his weapon, his fingers still ready to pull the trigger if needed. But the man spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that sent a chill down Jack's spine. "Leave now," the man ordered. The remaining bikers looked at each other, then back at Jack and the mysterious figure in the doorway. The tension in the room was palpable, but after a long moment, the bikers slowly backed out of the cabin, their eyes still wide with fear. As they left, the man didn't move, his eyes watching them until they disappeared into the woods. Jack lowered the shotgun, his hand still shaking from the adrenaline rush. He turned to the man, who was now stepping further into the cabin. "You saved us," Jack said, his voice full of disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" The man took off his helmet, revealing a scarred face, but his eyes were calm, almost friendly. "Name's Connor," he said with a small, grim smile. "And I've been trying to get you two to trust me." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You've been following us?" Connor nodded. "I've been watching for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Jack's heart sank. "Why didn't you just help us sooner?" Connor's expression hardened. "Because I knew it wasn't time yet. You needed to make it here, to this point. And I needed you to trust me on your own terms." Jack didn't know how to respond. The world around him was spinning, and everything felt more complicated than ever. "You knew the bikers were coming for us," Jack said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "But you waited." Connor's eyes flickered to Lily, who was still standing by the window, her gaze fixed on the ground. He sighed, his expression softening. "They're not the only ones who want her. And I didn't want you getting caught in something bigger than you can handle." Jack's chest tightened. The man was right. This wasn't just about bikers or threats. There was something more, something that was still out of their reach. "So what now?" Jack asked, his voice low. Connor took a step closer, his eyes fixed on Jack. "Now," he said, "we get ready. Because they won't stop until they get what they want. And that means we have to be prepared for whatever comes next." Jack felt a chill run through him. He knew what Connor was saying was true. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The night was quiet now, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Jack stood in the small cabin, looking out the window, at the dark forest that surrounded them. The sound of the motorcycles had faded, but he knew that it wasn't over. The people after Lily were still out there, waiting for their chance to strike. And as much as Jack wanted to believe that they could rest, the reality was far different. They were still on the run, and it was only a matter of time before the storm came crashing down on them. He turned around, looking at Connor, who was sitting by the fireplace, his face lit by the flickering light. The man had saved their lives, but Jack couldn't help but wonder if he was really on their side. "So what now?" Jack asked, his voice low and filled with exhaustion. Connor didn't answer right away. He sat back, his gaze steady, his face unreadable. "Now we prepare," he said simply. Jack didn't like the sound of that. "Prepare for what?" He pressed, stepping closer. "You know what's coming," Connor said, his voice rough. "The people who are after her won't stop until they get what they want. And that means we need to be ready." Jack's mind raced, the weight of his words sinking in. He had known they couldn't keep running forever, but hearing the reality of it hit harder than he expected. They were caught in something bigger than just a group of bikers. Something that had been lurking in the shadows for years, waiting to surface. "How do you know so much about this?" Jack asked, his suspicion growing. Connor's eyes flickered to Lily, who was sitting silently by the window, looking out at the dark night. Her small figure seemed even smaller in the dim light, and Jack's heart clenched. She had been through so much already, and yet there was no end in sight. "I've been tracking them," Connor said quietly. "I've been trying to get to her before they did, but I was too late. They're not just any group. They're part of something much darker, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack looked at him, his brow furrowing. "And what is it they want?" "Lily," Connor replied. "It's always been about her." Jack's heart skipped a beat. What do they want with her? He could hear the fear in his own voice, but he couldn't help it. Lily was just a kid. She didn't deserve any of this. Connor didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice was full of weight. "She's a key to something they've been after for years. Something powerful, and they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way to get it." Jack's mind reeled. He looked over at Lily again, his heart breaking at the thought of her being dragged into something so monstrous. But he couldn't show her any of his fear. She had to believe that they were going to be okay. Jack stood up straight, his jaw clenched. "We'll stop them," he said, his voice firm. "We'll fight back. We'll keep her safe." Connor looked at him, his expression unreadable. "That's the only choice we have now. But we need to be smart. We can't keep running, and we can't fight them head-on without a plan." Jack nodded, his mind working quickly, coming up with strategies, but all of them felt inadequate. How could they stand a chance against whatever was coming for them? The sound of footsteps from outside made them both freeze. Jack's hand instinctively went to the rifle, but Connor shook his head, signaling for him to hold off. Jack didn't understand. Who was it? Was it them? Was it too late? The door creaked open slowly, and Lily stepped inside. She had heard the footsteps, too, and her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them now, determination. Jack walked over to her, crouching down to her level. "You're okay," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "We're going to make it through this." She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, staring at him, before finally speaking. "I'm not afraid of them anymore, Jack," she said, her voice small but steady. Jack's heart broke at her words. She wasn't supposed to have to grow up so fast. She wasn't supposed to be carrying this weight. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something there that gave him hope. She was stronger than he thought. And together, they would make it through this. "We're in this together," Jack said, standing up. He took her hand, squeezing it tight. "We're going to fight, and we're going to win." Connor stood from the fireplace and moved toward the window. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice cold. "We don't have much time." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about taking back control, about fighting for Lily's future and his own. He wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. As they prepared, Jack could feel the tension building, the realization that this was the beginning of something bigger, the calm before the storm. But this time, Jack wasn't running. He was standing his ground, ready to protect the one person who had given him a reason to fight again. They had no idea what was coming, but whatever it was, they were going to face it together. And Jack wasn't going to stop until they were free.